It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, Quiller Nation. It's so good to be with you all once again. My guest for this episode comes to us all the way from Prague in the Czech Republic. He is a former U.S. Army officer who once wanted to be a dancer and then found himself becoming an actor who fell in love with the works of Shakespeare. But he's also a licensed counselor who specializes in trauma and uses theater and the works of Shakespeare to help those who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. As the co-founder of an organization called Decruit, you can find them at decruit.org, which is what he is here to tell us all about. His name is Stefan Wolfert. Stefan, welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
You are the creator and performer of a monodrama, a one-man show that you titled Cry Havoc, which I'll tell listeners you can find that on YouTube, fellow Quillers, and we'll be sure to post that at the Patreon page with a link so it will be easier for you to find. I had the pleasure of viewing it to prepare for our conversation today, and I was so intrigued with how very candid and open you are in the piece about your own life and your experiences in the Army and your journey through your own traumatic stress. But please tell my listeners how this journey into helping others through their trauma, through using Shakespeare, came to fruition.
Yeah. You can hear by my stammer that where to begin. I think for context, it helps to know that I'm just about to turn 59. So this has been a full life of work and a full, multiple versions of the journey or different legs of the journey, if you will. But I have that unique position, I think, where I'm, the latter part of my life where I can look back and think, the hindsight is not only 2020, but it gives a different perspective as well, to where I think, oh, of course I'm in the helping profession. I think it's hilarious that I ever thought I wouldn't be. The same holds true for being an actor. When I think back to as a kid, even though I didn't come from, a community or family that was really about that, because we were trying to survive. We were poor in the Midwest, and it just wasn't about the arts. It was survival and education first. And so I look back and think, I memorized the entire album of Steve Martin's Wild and Crazy Guy, and performed it for my sister. I memorized the Evita was touring in those days when I was younger. And the commercial, I memorized the commercial and would sing it and impersonate Evita. So now I look back and think, oh, of course I was going to be an actor and in the helping professions. But really, the work that I'm doing right now began as so many mental health professionals have also shared, is that it started as me search. Me trying to figure out, as I ask in the show Cry Havoc, what the heck's wrong with me, and eventually learn to explore, well, what happened to me. So if I can reframe it that way, I can perhaps introduce a little bit of compassion as I go through the journey and think, well, yeah, I was doing the best I could at that time. I got a little off from where you asked me to begin, but the Army was an escape really from my community. I didn't have many other opportunities to leave La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I really wanted to. I wanted to get out, see the world and other communities and other people, and see where I might fit in better. And the Army was a way to do that, especially in those days, in the mid 80s. People weren't joining the Army. People were joining the Navy because Top Gun had come out.
But everybody wanted to be Tom Cruise,
exactly.
Val Kilmer, right?
Everyone wanted to be an aviator. Meanwhile, the Army has movies like Bill Murray's Stripes and Private Benjamin, and those kind of movies were kind of mocking the Army. So people didn't go into the Army, but in the Army, I was a medic. So initially, I enjoyed that. I love. I actually always have. I love helping if I'm able to. I eventually became an officer in the infantry, but started as a medic and maintained that. And when I left, as I talked about in Cry Havoc, when I left for graduate school for acting, that was me trying to answer that question: what is going on with me? And theater, the principles of theater, as well as the tenets of classical actor training, and then add the rhythm and verse of Shakespeare's text. Those three, plus the theater community, who are, by and large, really welcoming, really, you show up, moles and all, be who you are, and we'll welcome and receive you, and work with you, and those four areas coming together for me, really kind of for the first time, certainly much more so than the Army even, really helped me to begin to understand what's going on with me. And as things shifted for me, other veterans I met I started engaging more, because I really didn't want to be a veteran at all. But as I was meeting veterans, because now I'm in New York and I'm on the East Coast, and then meeting more veterans, it's coming up more and more. And then I was in LA as well, and meeting more veterans, and started realizing, oh, I wonder if they'd be interested in what I went, the stuff that I have. So I did free classes. My now wife, but girlfriend at the time, we somehow a really lovely man, Jared Lazan in Los Angeles, had this upscale furniture store and had a storage space upstairs, and said, hey, if you want to use that for your classes, go ahead. And this is prime real estate, like thousands of dollars a square foot to rent.
Sure.
And he gave it to us. And that's how it really took off and began. It was free classes all week, during the week, and on the weekends. And then in the summer, we performed, and that eventually became what today is known as decruit, which is an actual intervention using Shakespeare's text, literally the verse and rhythm of Shakespeare's text and his characters, some of who are veterans and some are not, along with tenets of classical actor training, to help mitigate the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So leaning more towards the developmental trauma disorder. Sorry to throw all the technical terms. Just think of it as adults who experienced adverse childhood experiences. So adult survivors of childhood maltreatment, neglect, and abuse, but then exacerbated by adult traumas, whether it be military service or what have you. So that those came together to bring us in a space where we could explore other possibilities. Because that's what theater is, right? Theater was the original psychology, right? It was long before we had psychiatry, psychology, or social work, or psychotherapy. There was theater. The Greeks gave us the term catharsis. The Greek theater was a place where military veterans wrote plays and then performed them for an audience of veterans, cadets, service members, and family of. And so they used it to try to process their war trauma. Right in the middle of the community. And so I thought, well, that's pretty good. I didn't invent this idea, obviously. It's been around for millennia, but perhaps I can, build off of what they've done in my own small way. So that, I don't know.
Well,
if that
and certainly,
answers your question.
Certainly you're not the first person to recognize and to point out that we have this backwards system when it comes to recruiting those members of the military, training them to be, warriors, as
Right.
it were, asking them to go put their lives on the line, and in many cases take the lives of other humans. And then when they're done, they're discharged and goodbye.
Yeah.
And I love, but you certainly are, as far as I can tell, the person who created this term that I think is so useful and is so necessary, this term to decruit.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a process for that, do we? And
No.
Your organization has sort of created a process to help veterans sort of reassimilate back into society after what they've been trained to do and be and what they've experienced.
Yeah. That was my initial discovery for myself of how come, and this is what I would hear from other veterans as well. How come there was so much, and again, I talked about this in the show, and in the premise of Decrude is this, but there's so much testing and to get into the military, and so much support to get into the military. And once we're in the military, there's so much testing and training to make sure that we're what they call fit for service. And we're provided everything we need, not just the basic Maslow's basic needs of food and water and housing and uniforms and all that, but income and all. I could get into the neurobiology of it as well, but I won't at this moment, so I don't take us too far down the rabbit hole. But when we got out, and there's a manual for everything in the military, everything, and a protocol. But when we get out, there's nothing. So that's where I got the term of we're recruited but never decruited. And in the military, I talk about it in Cry Havoc. I argue that in the military, we are wired for war because every service member has to be trained to kill, because everyone, regardless of your job, is expected to be able to fire a rifle and a pistol and throw grenades and engage in combat. It is part of the job. I'm not condemning the military, by the way. I'm just stating that is a necessity. But none of that's unwired. And we're literally wired to respond to a threat with violence. But when we leave, there's no detraining, no de-escalating, no rewiring of that conditioning. And I think what astounded me was when I was looking at the stats, because when I got out, it was the early 90s, right? So this is post first Gulf War in Mogadishu, but before 9/11. And so a lot of my youth experiences before I got in the military were the Vietnam veterans of the American War in Vietnam. Those folks from 73 on, and I was alive. I was watching these folks go through it. I was young, but seeing what they were going through and it having an impact on me, and coming up when I got out, remembering, wow, I saw them go through it, and here we are again. And they talked about it, how you just dumped out, that you're not directly connected to the VA. Again, not condemning or making a big political statement, telling my experience and the experience of everyone I've worked with. And we wondered, why is that? Part of it is there's no mandate. So my original idea was, I really, had this bold idea, Stephen. I want Decrude to become a national program that's for every single person that's leaving the military, honorable or other than honorable discharge, or dishonorable, because maybe the dishonorable discharge is because of what happened to them in the military. Because there's quite a few vets I talked to that was the case. We wanted it to be national. We wanted to be across all branches and across all experiences, whether it's combat or not, whatever your job is. And we wanted there to be a comprehensive national program that was comparable to what we had to go through to go in to get out. And I don't mean that you couldn't get out, but I meant that, I don't know anyone who has gone through therapy and it made them worse. I really don't. Maybe there is, but it's certainly the exception. And so why couldn't there be an 8-week, like basic training, 8 weeks going in? Why couldn't there be an 8 weeks minimum coming out and help in all of the areas? So that was our original idea. That was my big, grand scheme, and had to really whittle it down over the past 30 years down to what we have now, which is, okay, I can't do that. I haven't figured out how to do that, but I can, thanks to Alicia Ali at NYU and all of the volunteers and folks that have worked with us, I can create a program to help. To get people in a room, and I know that it helped me, and I know it's helped others. So let's formalize this. That's where Decrude came about, and we researched it. And we've even proved that our program is an evidence-based treatment intervention for post-traumatic stress disorder. So that became our way of how do we make this. How do we make it deliverable? The interpersonal, with us sitting in the room or on Zoom, online. But how do we make it deliverable that way? And then the next thing is to try and make it scalable, to share and make it accessible. Like not make it this money-making scheme, but instead, more like the polio vaccine. Let's get it out there, and so people can have access to it. It is the arts, after all. right? It should be
You know,
available.
when I first learned of your program, the immediately what I thought about was that it sort of reminded me of other programs that I'm aware of where actors and directors have brought Shakespeare into penitentiaries
Yep. Yeah.
and have used Shakespeare and theater to sort of help
Hmm.
those who have been sentenced to long periods of time behind bars to process their crimes, to help rehabilitate them, to help them understand their internal motivations, the external pulling on those motivations that maybe
Yeah.
cause them to become a
That's
criminal,
right.
and to help them sort of deal with their own emotional, or even in some cases also traumatic experiences. And so that was the first thing that came to my mind. But then I realized, I thought, well, those people who go into a prison, and, there's programs like Shakespeare Behind Bars and others like that, for, pardon the term and a lack of a better term, but they have a captive audience. That they're going in and they know they're going to find a group of people. Generally, it's mostly men's prisons that I've read about and experienced through research. But they're going to find a group who is not only interested, but who is have very little else to do during those hours that they can avail themselves of this opportunity. You have this exact sort of opposite, where you have to sort of spread the word and let veterans know that you're out there and available to them. And it's sort of a different animal in that sense, then, isn't it? How do you keep reaching out to those who need this, to let them know it's a resource and to continue to let it expand?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the programs that are in incarceration centers and nationwide. They're great programs. Jonathan Schuyler in the Midwest, and Marin Shakespeare out in San Francisco Bay Area, and Kurt Toffman, who mentioned Shakespeare Behind Bars, and Notre Dame, Shakespeare Notre Dame. There's great programs, and they work. That's the other thing, is they're effective. And the thing they have in common, and I swear I'll come back to answer your question, but this comes up a lot. And the thing I'm often asked is, what is the connector there? There's quite a few connectors between the military and persons who are incarcerated or returning from incarceration. And that is, there's one big common factor. And I don't know if you've ever heard of ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. Okay, yeah.
Yes, I've taken that training. I volunteered at Maryvale in Rosemead, California, which it used to be a all girls children's orphanage, and it's now co-ed children's orphanage there.
Yeah.
And in order to be a qualified volunteer there, I had to go through the ACE training. And man, does that blow your mind completely open?
Sorry, I didn't interrupt. I just got
you're right. It is. Yeah. I recommend that every single human being could benefit from taking some of that training. You don't have to go through the entire course. You may not actually need first aid training, because that's part of it too. But I recommend that everybody go through some of that, because I think it really opens your mind to how behaviors result from trauma.
That's right. And we have, this word trauma is now thrown around so much that I want to be clear that we're talking about, well, I'll go back a little bit. So the average childhood experience is a score of 10 for anyone who hasn't seen it. And definitely look it up. I agree with you. Should take the training, or at least take the test. You can find a lot of stuff online about it, and around it, and what does it mean. And a little side note, there's a book called The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke. She talks about the long-term effects of folks with high ACE scores. So across lifespan, if the higher your adverse childhood experience score, the more negative outcomes one has across lifespan, and they're reversible. That's why she's bringing it up, is you really can counter those adverse childhood experiences. Well,
but they also compound too, right?
Absolutely.
Again, that's the thing.
That they literally shorten your life.
People talk about that sometimes, but what they don't realize is if you have high ACE scores, the odds of you contributing to somebody else's ACE score is exponential.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes. And on and on. There's so many links to it, but it's an important foundation to build upon, with that understanding of the importance of ACE scores and or childhood environment. And what we share in common is the Department of Defense and the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, did a study. I think it was with John Hopkins, if I'm not mistaken. But they found and have consistently found that military veterans and active service members have much higher ACE scores than civilians, than those who don't join the military. This is also true, perhaps unsurprisingly, of men and women who've been incarcerated or are in incarceration. So this is the foundation on which a lot of our behavior, if I can frame it that way, is built upon. So if we know that, we can begin literally working down in that area. Let's start to address this childhood neglect, maltreatment, and even abuse, and that's where we sort of accidentally backed into it. So to get to your question, because I swear they tie in. Whatever community I've been in. So like I was in Los Angeles for 10 years, then I was in New York. I was in New York 3 years, then LA 10 years, and then back to New York for whatever we were 7 to 10 years. Whatever community I'm in, I make sure I try to hit all of the events that I possibly can. Anything I can humanly make it to that is veteran oriented. And not just to hand out my card, but to make sincere connections, to find out what is everyone else doing? Can I contribute there? Are there gaps where I might be able to fit in? So I never assumed. I really tried to be community oriented and not assume that I could go in and go, I've got this program and I will heal you. No, do they even want me? For example, since this is a Shakespeare oriented podcast, working with in indigenous communities, Native American communities, as we call it in America, but Indians in Canada, et cetera. But the Native American community, indigenous community, Shakespeare was a weapon for them. It was weaponized against the indigenous community. It was used to take as a part of the colonization, not only of America, but then in the boarding schools. And we're talking up and through the 19th, arguably still today, but the 70s and 80s, there were really aggressive, violent programs, and Shakespeare was a part of that, to rob them of their culture. This is also true in many African American communities across, in Black communities across America. So for me to go in and go, yes, I do Shakespeare, and it helps heal PTSD, I have to be really aware of who I'm talking to and what that might, the harm that might cause. And also added to that, I want to be very clear. Think about, you mentioned folks who've been incarcerated. Think of how desperate someone has to be in prison to go to a Shakespeare class. How desperate they must be for community and to be understood and to dive within themselves. I mean, because that's not something, some of the stereotypes of the violence, some of the prisons I've worked at, the stereotypes of the violence are true. It can be very scary for the folks who are incarcerated. So to go there can sometimes put a target on them, so to speak. And yet they go, and yet they attend week after week. And they're willing to address and be vulnerable in that room, because that's what Shakespeare requires, right? And that's why he works so effectively with ACEs, is to tap into that vulnerability, to tap into that play, which has been denied someone who was a child of adverse childhood experiences. They didn't have time for play. They didn't have time for creativity. They're trying to survive, but now or be vulnerable. And now we're giving them, now they're in perhaps an incarceration center or a substance use treatment center, which is a lot of, I've worked in quite a few of those, and myself in recovery 12 years now. So so what I did was go to the communities, see what they were doing, volunteer, try to be a part of it, attend any events they have, veteran, non-veterans, like I said, substance use. I've been homeless before, so homelessness and unhoused persons are near and dear to my heart as well. So I would go to these communities and find out, can I be of service to them first, and then introduce, hey, I do have this program if you're interested in that. And so slowly over time, it gained traction. And what we found was, and pardon me if this sounds like this, because I'm asked, well, how did it grow? And that's it. It's volunteering, getting into other places, other people's programs, and helping, and then offering the work that we have. And then we would hear back from, in particular, some of the substance treatment programs where the people who run the facility would say, the person that spoke last week, they've been here weeks and I've never heard them speak. Because that's what the arts does, is it right? It gives voice to the unspeakable. It gives the language for us that we might lack for ourselves. If we feel we've been unjustly treated our whole lives, and you give someone Hermione's speech, that's a powerful moment. Working with veterans who are, sometimes 75 to 90%, and that's an actual number of some that I've worked with, 75 to 95, 90 and 95% disabled, to speak Richard III's lines. Now is the winter of our discontent, make glorious summer by the son of York, and to talk about how we're at peace, but I'm not. And I'm not built for peace. I'm not made for peace. No one likes me in peacetime. Where do I fit in? These are powerful passages that not only give the person an opportunity to try on or be given language for their own experience, but then to even dare to speak things they might not otherwise speak out loud. And most importantly, to be received and heard and seen by the community, and vice versa.
Well, you use that speech quite effectively in your piece, in your show, Cry Havoc. And not only that, but several pieces. Like, I find myself, and I'm sure many of my listeners, when they watch it, they'll find themselves doing the same thing. You don't identify every single play or character that you're talking about.
No.
But, those of us who know the canon very well, be like, oh, there's some Hamlet, there's some Richard III. Coriolanus is big. Henry V, Henry IV. There's even you have a touch of Falstaff in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your use of the characters and their monologues is extremely well done to not only demonstrate your story, but also I felt it helped demonstrate how you use these plays to help others. Yeah. And you made a comment that I didn't actually consider before, that I think is really profound and really important. And that is that you can find a veteran or more than one in nearly every single Shakespeare play.
Yeah.
And the others I started to realize, like practically the entire male cast of Much Ado About Nothing, they're all returning from war when we first see that play begin. Bertram and other characters in All's Well That Ends Well. Of course, Troilus and Cressida is filled with soldiers.
Yeah,
all the history plays, of course, Cymbeline, Pericles, even Love's Labour's Lost. You could argue that the men in that play are veterans of war.
I agree.
In fact, it becomes more difficult to think of plays without a veteran of war to be found in them than those plays that contain what would be seasoned soldiers within the cast. And I found suddenly my mind kind of exploded, and I went, well, here is an author who obviously understood war, who understood the military, and who created these very vivid and very lifelike characters, and some of whom are dealing with a certain level of what we would today call PTSD in their behaviors. Of course, Richard III, Coriolanus, really huge examples of that. But even, we see when Fortinbras arrives at the end of Hamlet, even, he's a military general. He's a conqueror. It's a very interesting perspective that I hadn't actually sort of looked at the canon through that lens before. And I found it actually exciting to then start sort of analyzing some of the works in a different way, and trying to understand how you use them with the people that you're working with. And I would like to know more about, like, what plays do you usually start with? Is it very individual? If it's a class of people, like, what is your curriculum sort of, syllabus?
Yeah, excellent questions. And thank you for everything that you offered there. As I've been doing it every time, I'm going to ramble a little bit and then come back to the question, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Just because you mentioned, I wanted to mention really quickly, you mentioned Much Ado, for example. And so from my angle, every time we worked on a play, I was seeing things differently, especially like when you mentioned Much Ado, they talk about Claudio. And the first thing they say about him is he performed the feats of a lion in the figure of a lamb. Well, that's a berserker. That's for me, that was Henry Lincoln Johnson, whom I talk about in Cry Havoc, right? It's these these unassuming small guys that I also saw the same thing happen in the military, where you're like, where did that come from? I mean, I thought, I didn't know this guy was ever even paying attention and could do a push-up. And what did he just do? And then Claudio, then later, he, instead of confronting, this is just my angle, obviously my bent, but, instead of confronting Hero privately, he does that public shaming, that violent public shaming. To me, that's an absolute classic PTSD response. This is a trauma response. Somebody just home from war, feeling shamed and betrayed, and responds to a threat with violence. So this has sort of always been my angle. That when I look at the plays, I seem slightly differently than my classmates and usually other people in the casts that I've been in, because most of the time, certainly before 9/11, I was the only veteran in the room, usually, maybe one other. And so, yeah, there was always that sort of other angle, if you will, including we few, we happy few. The Crispin's, Henry V's Crispianus speech, St. Crispin's speech, that always rang differently for me. I always hear it. It's always very moving, like Brana's version with the music and everything. And it's this build up, and that's true. It's certainly valid and beautiful way to do it. But anytime you talk to veterans who've been in that kind of situation, it's not great for an audience's experience, but the truth of that scene is usually quite a bit more somber. It's a little bit more resolved of, okay, yeah, that's right. It's us. This is who we got. This might be it, but this is who I'm going out with. It's one of those experiences that's really difficult to explain unless you've been there, I guess is what I'm saying. And yet Shakespeare does it, because he was, 1599, when, as Shapiro writes about, he wrote Hamlet, was it Henry V? And I forgive me, the other two, there's four that year, but they had just gone through 11 years ago. They had the Spanish Armada. And in that year, they're building up for what they believe to be another invasion from Spain. They had been in at that point, 9-year war with Ireland, much of it sort of guerrilla warfare, similar to what America experienced in Vietnam. So Shakespeare's writing plays during a time of war, some of it Cold War, some of it regular warfare, some of it conventional warfare. And I have no doubt, he's clearly seeing veterans. And he's able to write.
Well, and the history plays are just loaded with Civil War.
Absolutely.
English killing English, and in brutal, horrible combat.
Yes.
And I think that we see too is we see this fear that the country will plunge itself back into civil war because you have a queen who doesn't have an heir, and succession is looming. And oh my God, we're going to go back into that.
Yes.
It's going to be Wars of the Roses all over again. We've got to do something to stop that from happening.
Yes, and that's what makes him so special, is that we've got to do something to stop this. And so where you asked about our syllabus, that first piece that we work with. So we used to do back in the day whole plays with veterans, and we'd take a whole year to work on it. But then we refined it down. That became decrude because as we worked on it, I will go back to that for a moment. As veterans worked on their monologues, for example, we did these writing prompts. They were prompts that I did to write Cry Havoc. Cry Havoc began, by the way, as my graduate thesis back in the late 1990s. So as I was getting ready for my graduate thesis, my performance piece, it was basically Cry Havoc, somewhat inverted, but it doesn't really matter. Just so you know the origins of it, where it came from. And I had writing prompts for myself to write the piece. And so I gave those writing prompts to veterans, and I kept honing it down, and they informed a lot of it. They would tell me, like, well, this doesn't really apply. And so we'd throw that out. Same thing with the monologues. Like, this monologue wasn't as much of a response, so we get rid of it. That one, they're like, oh my God, they all would respond to that one. But these 4 lines, it would kind of gray over. So we'd cut those 4 lines. So we were very irreverent about it. And eventually linking their monologues to the Shakespeare pieces, essentially doing little miniature Cry Havocs of their own. My wife would come in and work with them for a bit. And she turned to me and said, this is way more interesting than the whole play. This is way more powerful. So we leaned into that. And that's kind of what became Cry Havoc. That is the foundations, because we then were able to refine it and go, okay, now we know the syllabus. And the syllabus is The very first piece we work on as a group is Lady Percy's speech from Henry IV, Part 1 of "Oh my good Lord, why are you thus alone?" That monologue, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's not first person. I mean, it is because you're Lady Percy, but she's describing what she's seeing. Versus, for example, say Hamlet, which we do later. Hamlet is first person saying, to be or not to be. That is the question.
Right.
You know, should I do this or should I do that? And should I be this or should I be that? But Lady Percy's saying, you know, why are you thus alone? Why do you startle so often?
You know, I love the way you set that piece up and the way you deliver it. And you do sort of give it sort of a feminine voice and quality to it when you deliver it. But the way you set it up, it makes it very clear that there isn't any reason why in a modern context that speech couldn't be delivered by a husband to a wife who is a veteran, who is suffering from PTSD. Right. And it was very moving. I mean, I have chills right now just thinking about it because I suddenly realized, wow, that can be... there's no gender specification there when it comes to a spouse saying to their partner in life, what is going on with you? What is happening inside of you? And how can I help?
Yeah, that's it. And so it's so horrifically accurate that there's James Shapiro is a psychologist who worked with American veterans from the war in Vietnam. And he wrote a book called Achilles in Vietnam. And in that book, he takes Lady Percy's speech and next to each question she asks her husband, he lists symptoms out of the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5 we call it now, the DSM. He lists symptoms that describe the symptomology of post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is line by line accurate. Shakespeare somehow wrote the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder 400 years before it became a diagnosis. So that's where we start. We start with that piece because we can talk about all the symptoms that are in that, who's experiencing it, how does it manifest for you. It's also, like I said, it's not first person, so it gives us a little bit distance from it. So it's a little more safe, if you will. Safe but not too safe, as you say in psychology or psychotherapy. And it's also in verse. The verse is vitally important for our work, that the iambic pentameter is the foundation of our work. So whatever piece we work on, you can kind of work on anything if you follow the verse, breathing in before each new line. But then on top of it, he's written brilliant pieces. We have 22. So we start with Lady Percy. Then we do more writing prompts. There's training that goes in between. But from the writing prompt, I've created this algorithm to where they do a writing prompt. And from that writing prompt, I list thoughts and feelings. They're really symptoms, but we describe them as thoughts and feelings. They write down all that apply that came up for them from that writing prompt. And then they pick one, or they pick the one that's most dominant, or they pick one out of the blue, however they want to do it. And what I have done is over time crafted for each one of those thoughts and feelings, I have a tailored Shakespeare monologue or sonnet that goes with that. So then what they do is what I described as their own little mini Cry Havoc, where they read their personal monologue and seamlessly go into the Shakespeare monologue. And that verse and rhythm helps them down-regulate their body. Their physiology actually comes from that trauma response from their monologue, but then reading Shakespeare, believe it or not, brings them back into what we call coherence or their zone of tolerance. Brings them down, regulates the system, the polyvagal system. I mean, the whole body, and brings online the parts of your brain that you actually want to survive and to heal trauma. The medial prefrontal cortex.
It's very.
Et cetera.
Sorry, excuse me. It's very yogic, isn't it?
Yeah,
because there's breath involved.
That's right.
There's a rhythm involved. Yeah. Many people describe iambic pentameter as being, in rhythm with the beat of the human heart. That da-dum, 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 da-dum. So that's interesting. That's a really cool concept that I didn't even think about. And I wonder now when I'm working with actors, I'm going to wonder if any of them are actually processing trauma and I just don't realize it as it's happening in rehearsals,
It probably are. I credit. So when I went to school, they were always talking about it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. Stay away from, leave your baggage at the door. But I was lucky enough to work, and I want to be very mindful when I say this, that I was lucky enough to work with two indigenous theater companies or theater makers, Randy Reinholds and Yvette Nolan. They were in Los Angeles and Canada, respectively. I want to really avoid the trope of the trope of magical Indian or any of that. That it was but what they taught me was that there is medicine in theater, and that's Yvette Nolan's term, right? Medicine shows. She has a book called Medicine Shows where she talks about the medicine of theater, and she was a big influence on me. That she and Randy on how here the indigenous theater makers are doing original plays by Native Americans. So of course trauma is going to come up. And I wanted to know, well, how do they process it? What do they do? And through cultural practices and rituals and by the way, vast majority of it through rhythm, through language, through community. It's the same things as doing a Shakespeare play. And he talks about it, right? This being in the globe, in that O, in that circle. We often gathered in a circle and would sing or dance, and after 8 hours of rehearsal of rehearsal of just horrific events, we'd dance and sing in a circle, and after 40 minutes I'd realize, wow, I actually feel better. This is uncanny how effective this is, because they really bring it right in the room. They bring they don't try to keep it separate or say that's your problem, deal with it later. So yeah, you can't do, in my opinion, I would say it's unethical to do, for example, Titus, and not address what happens to Lavinia in that play, knowing that at least 1 in 5 women have been raped in their life. So if you have 5 women in the cast, at least one has experienced what Lavinia is going to go through, and that's going to be triggering. Or people have friends or family who've been through it, so it's going to be triggering for them. So, and it doesn't take much. The thing I always get asked is, well, I only have so much rehearsal time, and we got to get to. We've never run out of time. We've never had less time addressing the trauma. In fact, it's been the opposite. When we take time for the people in the room, again, this is Yvette and Randy really guiding me this way, to take time for what's coming up and process as a group. And you eventually get really fast at it. The first couple of times it'll take longer, and it should. But then you get faster and you go deeper. And the more you work with those folks, the deeper you can go, and the more you can allow them to process their own trauma, because that is what we do in Decrude. I mean, to your point, you're wondering if cast members are. I'm willing to. Our data that Alicia Ali has shown us is the statistical likelihood is yes, because it does. And our main thing we do is hold space for them and give them the tools. They do it. We're not healing their trauma. They are. They are, and Shakespeare's verse is healing it.
Well, so the next question I would ask you is, when you have a group, but I don't know what size groups you work with, but are you putting on a Shakespeare play through like a rehearsal process, like producing and directing a show using these actors, or is it more of a collage of different scenes and monologues? Like what is the end result, I guess? Is it performance related?
It is performance related because it is a theater-based program. It started, like I mentioned, and as you just mentioned, it did start as doing full plays. We had my wife and I created something called the Veterans Center for the Performing Arts in Los Angeles. Then we had teamed up with Keith Jeffries at USFA, their United States Veterans Artists Alliance, and AMVETS. And we did a summer Shakespeare program there for a number of years. And those were oriented towards doing full productions. But as I said, the rehearsal process... What was
the most common title that you would produce?
Of plays? Well, we would do 2 each summer, so 2 new ones. But we did, I will say this to our credit. This is Keith, brave guy. We did Carrelli early on. Was this? Yeah, we were in the wars, but because it was 2005 or so. So we were in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but no one was doing Coriolanus. No one had done Coriolanus. In fact, when we did it, we had teachers, I swear to you, more than a few teachers come up and say, I didn't know Shakespeare wrote Coriolanus. I didn't think that he did. And I assumed they're talking like, is it part of the canon? Is it part of the original, 38, 36? No, they just really didn't know that Coriolanus was a Shakespeare play. It wasn't often done. And
what is wrong with them?
Well, and to me, it's the consummate veterans play, because here's a guy who goes by the age of 16 is at war. And he goes by my count, according to the play, to at least, I think it was 17 combat tours, is what I think I added up. He does a Levinar against Aufidius alone. So here's someone whose whole life has been at war, whole adult life. And then when he comes back, they want him to use his words and not his actions. They want him to become a politician, not just a civilian, but a politician. Of course, in the banishment, when he's banished, when he goes off, that incredible speech of rage, I banish you. Veterans get that. Veterans are like, yes, I get that. I know what that means. I know what that's like to have my country banish me, to ignore me. And that's that decrude I'm talking about. There's this drop off where we're just kind of amputated from our community and dumped back into a new community that many of us fled from. So Coriolanus is a great play for veterans and family veterans to come together and try and understand that transition, that difficulty of that transition. But as far as what you're asking then, as far as performance, what we do now, so what we've done the last, whatever it is, 12 years or so, is, as I mentioned, they write their own monologue, a writing prompt into a Shakespeare play that they literally cast themselves in because of that algorithm that we've created, or that we call it the Shakespeare soliloquy sequence. It's scientific. It has to have a long name. But that sequence gives them their Shakespeare piece. And what we do is on the final night, so the second to the final class, we always sit in a circle whenever possible. And we perform, quote unquote, perform for each other. So one at a time. And I'm always there to coach if needed. And the coaching is simply breathe in, and that's before each new line of Shakespeare's verse. So they can experience the difference between their piece and Shakespeare's regulation. And the other thing is, before and after they begin, they make eye contact with everyone and they sort of check in and share what's going on with them. Again, not something we're used to doing as veterans. So each person shares their piece and we go around and hold space for each other. And then we have a discussion. The final night, they get to invite people. So it's by invitation only. And the audience is instructed by me or whoever's facilitating. So we have other decruiters as well, that we explain. We say, hey, welcome. Of course, it's always that sort of Rogerian approach of unconditional positive regard as people enter the room, and welcome, welcome, welcome. The veterans sit in a circle in the middle, if it's possible, and everyone else is on an outer circle. If it has to be sort of classroom or classic theater setup where, the proscenium, if you will, that's fine too. You can still do it, but we like the circle. And what we do is inform the audience that, hey, normally we, the actors, are here for you, the audience, to share a story. But in this case, you're here for the actors. You're here for the veterans. And since now, for the last, 8 years or more, we've worked with across populations. It's not just veterans. So with anyone, we say actors. So you're here to hold space for the actors. They're going to be sharing truths that they may never have shared before. And there will be time afterwards, because we have a post-show discussion, again, learned from the Indigenous community, for you to talk. And so the veterans, each one by one, go up and share their personal piece and seamlessly go into Shakespeare. The caveat is the veterans get to decide whether or not they share their personal piece out loud. They can read it to themselves, because the audacity it takes for someone to stand in front of an audience and read to themselves is a powerful opportunity to take up time and space. And that's often something that's really difficult for trauma survivors. So they read their piece to themselves or others, or out loud, and then they read the Shakespeare piece. Then they open their eyes and make sure they bow. I worked with Twyla Tharp. I don't know if we'll have time to get to that, but Twyla Tharp really changed my mind about curtain calls. It helped me understand the therapeutic component to that. But anyways, they eyes open, looking at the audience, receive their love, and then they yield the space, and the next person goes. So there is a performative component to it, but it's much more of a therapeutic or group therapy model than it is sort of classic Shakespeare play.
So there have to be certain soliloquies and monologues that you find through your SSS, your S cubed system.
I like SSQ. That's good.
S cubed. The soliloquy. What was it? It was 3 S's there. The
Shakespeare soliloquy sequence.
There you go. Shakespeare soliloquy sequence.
Yeah.
Say that 5 times fast. It's a good tongue twister to warm up.
Good warm up.
But there have to be some there has to be sort of a bell curve there, right?
Yeah,
there have to be some that are that resonate more often with more subjects, and some that are sort of, more rare and are used least frequently. What are some of the, share with us, if you can, some of the pieces that fall in that curve?
Absolutely. So we have 22. Those were crafted over time. For a long time, I had about 12 to 15. And then I found that when I started working into the 12 or 15 came from Cry Havoc, by the way. They had seen or heard the pieces already. And then, they performed by me, and then they were able to, I know that can sometimes be a problem, but there was sort of me self-disclosing. Cry Havoc was really me self-disclosing to open up the gateway for them to self-disclose. So that was the not only the theory, but in practice, what turned out to be the case. And originally it was just the 12 or 13 monologues from Cry Havoc. Then it expanded to 15. And when I started working in specifically incarceration centers, I found that there was more needed. And so I added them, and I can talk about that. It came up to 22. And I kept it at 22 because of at the time, it was 22 veterans a day killing themselves. And so I felt that was a very resonant, or a number that had a lot of resonance for veterans. And then, like I said, now we work with non-veterans, so that number, the 22, often goes back down to 15. Okay, so for incarcerated persons, one can imagine Richard II's final speech. I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. And because the world is populous, and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it. Yet I'll hammer it out. So that piece I've broken into 2 hunks. There's, for those who know it, at the music. I break it right before the music, and then from the music to the end is another piece. That resonates deeply with folks who've either been incarcerated or are returning from incarceration. Some of the ones that are really, really common, of course, Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. It is edited. I've cut down a fair amount. That is because a good percentage of the folks I work with have encountered some version of suicidality. That includes not only suicidal behavior, ideation, but non-suicidal self-injury, those got self-harm, even, a lot of times eating disorders and body dysmorphia will fall into this sort of same obsession and compulsion, if you will. So Hamlet is, to no one's surprise, is deeply relatable. I also use Hamlet's. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. I have versified that. I have put it into verse. It's only so there's a common place for folks to breathe. And because, as I mentioned, the breath is vitally, vitally important, because it's helping them regulate, even though they're sharing big emotions and big thoughts and you often re-experiencing the trauma they've gone through, but their body is learning to regulate itself through that process by breathing in at the beginning of each line. So that's why there are pieces that I've taken that are in prose, but put them in verse. I also use, I want to say sonnet 33 or 35. Sorry, the number is escaping me at the moment, but it's no more be grieved at that which thou hast done. That was a deeply resonant piece for me. So I experimented and gave it to other veterans and like, yes, yes. And those who are suffering guilt or shame or both, that's a powerful piece. And
Hamlet obviously has such a degree of self-loathing going on. I wondered if you used rogue and peasant slave or not.
I haven't. I've experimented with it, and it is a good piece, but it's a good piece. Listen to me. It's not bad writing.
I think it's the best monologue of them all, quite honestly. I mean, to be or not to be has its place, but I think Rogue and Peasant Slave is the best.
In the play and as soliloquy stand, absolutely defensible argument, and I'm in a pretty strong agreement with you. In terms of remembering that we're using them as therapeutic devices, surprisingly, it didn't have as much relatability. It's not that we never used it, or when we did, it didn't have potency. It absolutely did, but it just wasn't coming up as strong or as quite literally giving as much catharsis as the others. And in contrast, by the way, a little bit is, I use Falstaff. There are two Falstaff speeches, but his honor speech.
Yeah.
Honor pricks me on, but how if honor pricks me off again? How then? I versified that as well, because that is, for so many, I thought it was just veteran, but it's not. For so many, this question of honor, it's just hammered into us. And here's this brilliant, and Falstaff, by the way, is a veteran, regardless of your opinion of him.
Yeah.
He's a military combat veteran. And
is he a deserter? I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to say.
No, absolutely. But that's a human response, right? We can't. It's difficult. It's a dangerous thing to judge how people respond under combat situations, even if you've been there, because everyone's different. We just don't know what they're coming into that experience with. And if their neurology doesn't allow them to stay, if their neurology is not fight but all flight or freeze, that it's not their fault. They're not making a conscious choice. They've gone into a trauma response and they can't come out of it. I could go off on that, but in the interest of time, that honor speech was so powerful for me because it gave me, that's where kind of the beginnings of Decrude even were, because for me to say those words on stage, I had to chicken out, and I played Falstaff drunk and very clearly not me, because I was too afraid to say those words. But more and more I started leaning in and just saying it. And it became really powerful for me to be able to be on stage and be two things at once, to be a veteran, but be deeply ashamed of my veteran status. It both can be true. I can be proud and ashamed. I can be proud and ashamed. I can be, think honor is a good thing. I also think it's the most idiotic thing ever. And that's what Shakespeare does so brilliantly, right? So those are some of the pieces. And I already mentioned Lady Percy. That's just hands down a great piece to work on.
Your performance is very physical. I was impressed with the amount of physicality. Monodramas can be a very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
They often can come across as droll or boring, especially if they're a single voice, which you avoid. You become many voices. And in fact, you play multiple characters, not just in the monologues that you're reciting, but in the story that you're telling. You voice multiple characters. And I think that's an important part of keeping it intriguing and entertaining, but you're also extremely physical. How much physical acting do you attempt to teach or share with the students in your classes?
Great question. So that is all led by the individual, because when I work, my wife and I have been lucky enough to work at a lot of universities because Decrude gave us sort of enough visibility to where we've been able to work with undergrad and grad students in acting. At Syracuse University, for example, we got a fellowship there, which was really exciting. And when we work with these folks, in those cases, they tend to be able-bodied, and if I can frame it that way, and we let them lead. But if they're interested in it, we can go very deeply into the physicality, because when I did Cry Havoc, I really wanted both things happening at the same time. I wanted my text work, whether it was prose, my prose, or Shakespeare's text, to be at the heightened, um, absolute optimum ability that I'm able to deliver for the hour and 15 minutes. But I also simultaneously wanted someone to be able to literally watch this without sound and taken a journey. So I wanted if it's stillness, it's chosen. If it's gesture, it's deliberate. I wanted it as tightly choreographed. And I would some days rehearse just the movement of the entire piece without any words or very whispering. And some days just the text. So I share that because that's then how we're available to work with someone that wants to work with us, whether it's an acting student or not necessarily, or an actor, or veterans, or people who have survived trauma. But then working with veterans, there would be a lot of times where I'm in a circle with folks who are, bound to wheelchairs or have prosthetic limbs. You know what I mean? So we're not. I have to adjust to where they are at, and I have to. In fact, it affected a lot of my language because I was so used to going, all right, let's stand up on our feet. Well, you've already alienated, or rather, I already had alienated half my room in some cases because a lot of them can't stand. You know what I mean? So we adjust. I had to really become. We have the language now, trauma-informed language. We didn't have it so much on our own when we started. We were learning it by failing miserably and then leaning in and going, can you help me do better? Because we've had folks who've been hearing impaired or deaf. We've had folks who are blind or visually impaired. So how do you adjust for those? And we let them tell us what they want to work on. But physicality is certainly something because, as we now know, trauma lives in the body and it must come out of the body. It's not just something that we can't think our way out of trauma. I mean, perhaps some can, but there would be a very small number of people. The majority need to work on the mind and the body. But we also have to adjust to what are the limitations of the body we're working with, and we allow them to inform us, and then we work with that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, when I asked that, because I'm a firm believer that acting is 90% what you do and 10% what you say. And the action has to match the word or the audience is lost, especially when you're dealing with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And we call it acting for a reason. We don't call it oration.
Right.
Even though in Shakespeare's time they would say, I'm going to go hear a play. They were actually watching the play.
Yeah.
So that was my curiosity, but I didn't think about, and very seldom have I had the opportunity to work with actors who've had some sort of a physical disability or restriction.
Yeah.
So I didn't even think about, but obviously, of course, you probably have, it's probably a larger percentage of those who have some sort of physical injury, especially, if they received that injury in combat.
Yeah. Yeah. Or in other areas. And like I said, then working with what's also near and dear to my heart is working with folks who are not able-bodied, in many different areas. And I think it's amazing to get those folks on stage because we did in Los Angeles with the veterans who either had traumatic brain injury and can't memorize, or had such severe PTSD they couldn't memorize. So but they deserve to be on stage. So it was our job to figure out how do we facilitate them being on stage without them feeling otherized or more otherized than usual. And because audiences are amazing, if someone's feeding in, like from I hadn't gone to Shakespeare and Company yet. I didn't know that was the term, but we had one veteran where someone that they trusted followed behind them and fed the lines into their ear. And for about a minute or two, you saw people going, what the heck? And then boom, that person became invisible to them, or they were a two-headed person. Do you know what I mean? They just went with it. It's truly suspension of disbelief. So we trust the audience.
Like puppetry to some degree, right?
Yeah.
You start to only see the puppet and not the operator.
Yes. And all the different ways you can get creative and take risks and see, again, let the actors tell us, what will work for them. But so we had to adjust There we go. There was another thought, but I started to rush. I was worried, so I forgot. If it comes back to me, I'll hop in and say it. But there was something else to that end.
I don't know that I've
I
ever heard that
remember.
term, feeding in, before.
Oh, so Shakespeare. I was lucky enough to work with Shakespeare and Company in Los Angeles, Lennox, Massachusetts. Yeah,
No,
they're in
yeah,
Lennox.
yes,
Yeah, Lennox in the
yeah.
Berkshires, and was lucky enough to become dear friends with Tina Packer and the late, incomparable Dennis Krosnick, and Kevin Coleman and some of the original founders. And they do it in their training program. They do something called feeding in, and that's where someone's behind. You build up the trust for someone to get behind or to the side of the actor. That way, the actor's eyes can be on the other actor, and there's someone holding the script, and they monotone feed it in one line at a time, just the way we do it at Deep Brew, right? It's breathe in, to be or not to be. That is the question. They feed that into their ear, and then the actor breathes in and gets to share that line however it's hitting them at that moment. That way they don't have to worry about lines. They don't have to think anything more than just be in the moment. So it's a really powerful, powerful tool. And there was one more thing that I remembered. I was going to say that Dennis Krosnick used to say that sonnets and soliloquies are a journey into madness. And you must take that journey. I thought of it when you were talking about it's 90%, what you do and 10% what you say. That reminded me of Dennis saying that, and that is really what we're doing with those monologues and sonnets, or soliloquies and sonnets, is we're allowing the veterans, and now it's more than veterans, so the folks who are doing it, to take that journey into madness, because it's important that they take the journey, because when they come out on the other side, now they realize, oh, I can get unstuck. I can journey through this. I don't have to stay in my vicious cycle or in my loops. I just went through it one time. I took a journey through madness and came out on the other side. So that's the power of these pieces. You really just got to lean in. And the last thing I'll say is, we're talking about able-bodied and everything else. We also have a lot of folks who English is a second language or have some barriers to speech. They also deserve to be heard and seen. So we love working with these folks, because now it's less important that they understand all the Elizabethanisms of it, but rather, how do these consonants and vowels strike you? What's happening to you? What comes up for you? And how do we release that even more for the audience to experience it, and more importantly, for you to release it? So
well, there's something very freeing about, and when you look at certain of the language, like, there's something very freeing about the in some cases you might even call it overuse of plosive consonants, or in some cases alliteration. But I think our writer, when he does that, he's doing that on purpose. He wants that effect of how it sounds. And when I say acting is 90% what you do, a big part of what you do is how you choose to say the line, right? The voice is just as physical as the rest of the body. So, rate of speech, tone, inflection, all of that are physical choices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking Shakespeare is an athletic event all by itself.
Yes, it certainly can be.
Right. And so, so just giving yourself over to that is enough. And then, like I said, with the vowels and the sounds that he writes, that very often, because trauma is stuck in the body, there's a lot of times where we'll see, voice teachers will tell you this, that they can see right away where people have sort of dissociated a part of themselves to survive. And the idea of bringing vibration to that part of their body, whether shoulders or softening their jaw, it could literally, as Ruth Cohn talks about in working with developmental trauma, it can feel like an obliteration of the self, is the way she puts it. Asking that person to soften their jaw. And that's certainly what I experienced when I went to grad school. They were saying, undo your jaw, undo. And I would get so angry, because I'm like, I don't know how to undo. I only know how to do. I came here really, really highly wired for war. This is what I've got. I'm sorry, I don't know what undo. And if you say it again, I'm going to be even more angry. And so to soften, or to invite breath or vibration to parts of the body, it's a big ask for folks. But then you start bringing in, like you said, I love it. Like, think of Carrelli's "You come and cry of curs," whose breaths I hate. he gets to just it's just snarling, growling language to let that vibrate through the whole body. Oh, I'm getting choked up now just thinking of some of the folks. Like when my wife does it, it just tears me up because she's not acting. She's just letting that stuff flow through. And so are the other folks that we've worked with. And someone who's been locked up 20 years, I worked with veterans who were in Vietnam and came from Vietnam and went to prison, and they're still there. Man, when they speak that, and I don't mean the rage of that. I'm talking about the everything. There's self shame, self rage. There's been no space for them to release it. And if you release it, it has less power over you. So yeah, I could go on, obviously.
Well, you've touched on a few different points that I kind of want to circle back on. One just recently when you said, the madness aspect of it, and there are plenty of parents out there whose children have become actors who would agree with you. This is madness. This is utter madness.
Yeah, yeah.
but that connects to what you said very early on in the program, and that is that there is this community there that unless you've been a part of it, you don't quite understand it. I always like to say the rehearsal hall is the land of misfit toys.
Yeah.
Everyone is welcome here, even the Charlie in the box and the train with square wheels, if you know the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer context of that. But I feel like, we are such a welcoming and supportive environment. The greatest relationships in my life, the great majority of them have all come to me through the theater, and including my wife. So, there's, theater people are the best people in the world. And I think that by offering that space to people who are dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with, and whether it begins with your work that started with veterans, but now goes into others who've had trauma from other parts of their life. It is a haven of expression that I think is super important. And I always say that anybody who hasn't been in a theatrical production needs to be at least once. And most people I know, if they do it once, they'll do it again because of that experience, because of how enriching it can be. Yeah.
I love that. I agree. I think it could be, I don't want to say compulsory, but more available and more accessible. And to your point about it being, a haven, I would, I agree overall, but I would add the caveat that it can be a haven because, I'm also, in addition to being an actor, I'm a social worker. And one of the things I love about social work and social workers is, even though the practice and the individuals and the community of it are there to be of service, we also recognize that we've done harm, right? That we've in the name of social work and doing good, we've done harm to communities. Just for context, for an example, and I'll use in Canada, the Canadian Mounted Police were originally created to round up activation warning, by the way, here. But the Canadian Mounted Police were originally, as I understand it, created to help round up Indigenous children and adolescents to take them to boarding schools. That was done at the behest of social work programs, thinking that boarding schools were better. So we've got a lot of harm on our hands, and we have to identify. And so I think I like saying it can be a haven because we can always do better. Because to be quite blunt, I think that theater could really use a national self-reflection of, are we doing enough? Are we being accessible enough? Because look, I get why sometimes you don't, because I often said that my autobiography of my theater days would be called Doing the Impossible with the Inadequate for the Ungrateful. Because that's how it felt. Right?
I think every single theater producer has felt that way at some point in their lives.
Absolutely.
Yes,
so then
wait a minute, that's my autobiography. You can't have that.
I know, right? We'll fight for the domain name or whatever. But no, you can have it. You're exactly right. Every artistic director, every producing director, every producer, it feels the same way. Education department, certainly, because they're so often overlooked, and training. But but I think it's important and to ask those folks then to do more or be more accessible, that's really difficult. That's a difficult ask, but I think it's important that we do, because I have found that a lot of pushback over time I don't want to go too far into it, but just that I think that I think American theater and American theater training, again, just my opinion for what it's worth. I feel like we've sort of industrialized it. We kind of make, and there's reasons for standards. I get it, but I feel like it's kind of become like auto manufacturing. You know what I mean? Like we kind of make.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. And not to get into a side tangent that's beyond our topics, but I think it's important to note, and I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but I think when we're spending so much time arguing over how 10-minute breaks should occur in rehearsal hall, we've really lost focus.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand the importance of unions, and I understand the importance of standards, and I understand that there are protections involved that are necessary. But when it gets in the way of the creative process, we've really gone too far. And you're right. It has become an industry rather than a creative art at that point. And that stuff just drives me crazy.
Yeah. And I just meant about, our experience of trying to put different folks on stage, and the pushback we initially got, and then when it worked, people are like, oh right, I guess I didn't realize. It's just, I just think that it's a very white, able-bodied male space overall. It is just and I've traveled all over the country, all 50 states, including Canada, and that's just my personal opinion. I think we could reach out and do more to make it, to bring in more folks who also want to be actors, because we meet them in communities. There's people who would love to be on stage, and they're powerful. They're powerful, brilliant artists that deserve to be heard and seen on stage. So it's some risks. It's theater. We should be taking risks.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I love community theater as much as I do.
Yeah.
I have been involved in professional productions, and they can be very rewarding. And I've worked with some great union talent, some great Actors Equity members. But I shied away from taking that step because of how over controlling the union can be, and how stifling I feel it is to creativity, and how I find that there needs to be a stage for every age and every level of ability.
Yes, agreed.
And that's been the focus of me as a producer director, and it's something that I will always cleave to. And I think that no one knows Shakespeare is hard until you tell them it's hard. That's another thing I've learned. And same thing with, a kid can ride their bike across the top of a picket fence until you teach them about gravity, and then they fall off, and I think that that's true about Shakespeare. People can embrace it, learn it, and do it quite well if they're not intimidated by how much they've been told it's the hardest thing and it's the master craft and all of that. And I think you're proving that regularly by using it this way to help people the way that you do.
Yeah.
But this is a good segue. You talking about traveling the country, and at the top of the program, I introduced that you were coming to us from Prague. Why Prague? How Prague? What's that about? What are you doing in Prague, and how'd you end up there? Real quick, can you share that with us?
Absolutely, yeah. I was lucky enough to come work with. There's a company here in Prague, in the Czech Republic, Central Europe, called Prague Shakespeare Company, founded by Guy Roberts and Jessica Boone. They're a couple, and they founded it I think about 20 years ago now. They also have a summer intensive and a winter intensive. Where the summer they bring 150 people from all around the world for training, and they put up something like 16 different Shakespeare productions all around Prague. It's really cool. It's brilliant chaos. It's absolutely fantastic. One of the places they perform is the Estates Theater, and it's where, to give you an idea of how beautiful this place is, it's where Amadeus premiered Don Giovanni. It's that old and that beautiful. And then you get these little other smaller theaters in Prague that are literally the places to where the Velvet Revolution happened, where the artistic director and playwright Havel, who was the first president of the Czech Republic after they kicked out the Russians, who they met in theaters to figure out how to have a peaceful revolution to get Russia out of the Czech Republic. It's really an incredible place. So my wife and I have been lucky enough to come here and work the intensive. I performed Havoc here a few times. My wife and I did some other adaptations of Shakespeare, looking at Shakespeare from a trauma perspective. The different ones that probably makes it sound really dry and clinical. It's not. But looking at Richard III through a PTSD lens, and looking at Margaret of Anjou, her journey through the Henry VIs, for example. My wife did a play called She-Wolf that takes that journey, and of course the Macbees, the Scottish play, cut down to just looking at it from a couple and a veteran standpoint. So we brought those over, and about, I guess it would be 4 years ago now, I was reaching the terminus of Cry Havoc. I could feel it. Physically, I couldn't do it. I had to modify a lot of the stuff. My body was just not able to do it anymore. Psychologically, it was starting to actually cost me. Instead of it being cathartic, which it was for 10 years, it started costing me more. So we knew the end was coming. And that's when I also went back to school to become a licensed psychotherapist. And right about 3 months before I graduated, this is 3 years or 2.5 years ago now, Guy called us and said, "Hey, would you consider coming to Prague and on a cultural visa and living and working here and basing Decruit? We're based out of New York, but also would you also do it here and be a part of the company and part of the training program and live here?" And before I could even turn my head to my wife, Dawn, to see what she thought, she went, "Yes, we're in." So about a week after I graduated, we put our stuff in storage. We moved here. We got the visa. A dear friend of ours, Tori Rhodes, emptied out our storage space. She and her friend Spencer emptied it out, and Judge and Army vet, by the way, Judge, and they emptied it out. And so we've been here now 2 years, and we've renewed for another 2, and we love it. And we are basing out of here.
Well, that's what an incredible journey you have had through all of this, and the way that it continues to sort of evolve as it moves forward is really, really astounding.
Thank you. It's just it's trying to bring to life what I aspire to do in the rehearsal room. I love rehearsal, by the way, more than performance. I love rehearsing, and that idea of being present and seeing and being available for what's next. That practice of being in the moment and being present and seeing what's available or making yourself available, tried to do it in my life. And when I do, amazing opportunities like this one come up. And
now, see, I have to agree. I love the working rehearsal process. I always tell actors right from the get-go, like, I love the table work. That's a lot of fun and very important.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows me and has ever worked with me knows the first thing I say at the first blocking rehearsal is, "I hate blocking."
Yes,
it is the worst part. It is the worst process. I hate it. I always use the Matrix analogy. I say, if I could just stick a chip into your heads and download the blocking into you, we could move on to the working process and really get down to like the meat and potatoes of this play. But I can't stand the blocking. And then of course, tech is tech. Tech is always tech. And that's why we call it Hell Week. It's a real thing. But yeah, I can't agree with you more. The rehearsal process, that collaborative work, the exploration and the discoveries that are made together between director and actor, or as a group of actors, it's just you can't match that. I don't know how to match that in any other experience I've had in my life.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that people participate in it and have had that experience. And I think it's so important that you're using it in such a therapeutic way, the way that you are. One last thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's practically obligatory for me to ask this question, but as a U.S. Army veteran, as a veteran, period, regardless of the branch of service or even the conflicts or the experiences that you've had, as a veteran, as a military man, and the way that you have looked at these plays through that lens and the discoveries that you've made, specifically talking about, as you mentioned, there's a veteran in nearly every play or multiple veterans, characters that we don't see immediately as veterans of war. We discover if we look into them deeper, we go, yeah, well, like you said, Falstaff is definitely a combat veteran. And seeing how well this author has depicted these characters in that way, and as you mentioned earlier, which was very profound, basically creating the list of PTSD symptoms 400 years before psychotherapy decides that this is something we should probably pin down. Do you find it almost crazy to believe that this guy from this country town of Stratford, who had no military experience whatsoever, could have possibly known these things and written these things and been so profound in his understanding of war and the military complex and the traumas of combat? Like, does that resonate with you, or do you find that sort of not being able to match up?
I'm stammering because it's there's so much there with what you just said. I find it a really interesting exercise to explore. I've not found, because I went to graduate school and they only spoke of Shakespeare as being William Shakespeare from Avon, as we doubters would say, but for them, Shakespeare, and I was ingrained and indoctrinated into that way of thinking. I always had an interest in the others, so I would always read authorship things more as entertainment, assuming it was that guy. I did often wonder, I was often baffled as a veteran, like, how the heck did he know all this? And it was often put to me that, well, there are missing years for Shakespeare. So I thought, well, maybe he did. I don't know. There's no record of it, and we'll never know for sure. So I didn't really worry about it. And I will say, keeping it more instead of but, I'll do the yes and. Once the first
it's an improv exercise now.
Exactly. I mean, keep in mind, I read way back. I think it was like in the early 2000s. Like there was, but the proposal of the Swan of Avon, something like the oh gosh, I'm sorry, Duchess of Avon maybe wrote it, and some others. So I was always very interested. I thought it was compelling that there was not certainty. And I'm not plugging for anything. I'm just saying what happened for me was I first saw the documentary about Anderson's book, Shakespeare by Another Name. Nothing is truer than truth. And I think I watched it 3 times. And I'll be completely honest, I was devastated. I was actually really distraught and thought, oh my God, I have doubt. And then I read the book. I read it twice and listened to the audiobook with my wife, because we were van lifers at that time. So we were driving a lot. And then we listened to it 2 times. And it really did for me, it certainly created doubt. I leaned towards Oxford just because of the what's laid out in the documentary and in the book. As a veteran, I think, well, yeah. I mean, if we can track Oxford going to all of these places and seeing it, so he could have actually seen, combat and seen war, or at least observed it and been around and been more privy to, because so much of it is written, with the exception of a little touch of Harry in that night in Henry V, and Falstaff, the vast majority of it is the upper, right, the nobility and their experience with war. And what I think is so brilliant and different about Shakespeare is that he's writing about the cost of war, right? There's not a whole lot that happens on stage in war. Most of it is off stage, and we talk about what happened and the consequences of it. But it's also mostly the upper echelons, and yet here he brings in the lower. If you'll allow me to use Elizabethan chain of being language, not my own, of the lower classes or the peasantry, and And for him to say that brilliant scene of that guy in disguise talking to the king, saying, "Yeah, it's great for him. He gets ransomed off, but we die. We're the ones who bleed and die. We're the ones who make others bleed and murder and take those, if we survive, take those nightmares home." It's just so brilliant. And for me, that doubt was sown even deeper of thinking of the journeys that Oxford took. But I'm under no campaign to convince anyone. This is my personal belief.
Sure. No, I get that, and I appreciate your honesty and your candor there. One of the things I think that I have failed to look at until preparing for this conversation with you, and now as a result of this conversation, so many people who are, have become sleuths into this literary mystery of who is the real Shakespeare, as it were, get caught up in things like, well, how could he have known about falconry, and how could he have known about things at court, and how could he have known about the Greeks, and how could he have, and all this education. And I think one of the things we miss that you have connected to and done such a great job of sharing with now me and my listeners and the others that you've worked with is his understanding of combat. And his understanding of combat at every level, not just, the hierarchical level of it, the chain of command aspect of it, the recruitment aspect of it. Because we do have scenes of recruitment where, these commoners are being basically, conscripted to go to war. There are so many levels of military knowledge here that I think sometimes get forgotten, that I think, okay, well, even if you want to argue that the man from Stratford could have learned this, that, and the other thing, how do you explain this exposure to conflict and war? And I don't think that's possible. I think, in fact, it's very impossible to do. Between not only Falstaff but Mercutio, and in particular, especially the Queen Mab speech, but his behavior throughout the play, and Coriolanus, and even Richard III, his nightmares that come to him. That's to me, soft I dip a dream. That whole speech, that is one of my absolute favorites for it, because that back and forth, him fighting himself, that's an absolute veteran in for me, it's a veteran in absolute trauma response, going back and forth. It's so insightful. People forget how many ghosts there are in Richard III. They don't see that as a supernatural play, but there are more ghosts pop up in that play more spirits in that play than just about any other.
I agree, but then you add like Mercutio's lines about the palisados and his not only fencing and sword work, but then when you compare that in Lady Percy's speech, where she lists all the different pieces of artillery. I mean, it is. I agree. I'm agreeing with you. It's extensive knowledge, and it's not just the technical, aspects of it. Just because he knows every single artillery piece and every single sword movement piece, and French and Italian, and all that. Not just that, but it's like I said, it's the way Mercutio behaves. It's the way Jaques behaves.
I was going to mention Jaques, because then then you look at Jaques and especially the 7 ages of man, and one of them he specifically talks about the soldier.
Absolutely.
And so obviously we see that Jaques is also a veteran. And why wouldn't he be? He's one of the right hand servants of a duke, so of course he would be.
Yeah. In grad school, I read a book. It's out of print, but I found it. It was Sergeant Shakespeare. There was a guy. It's interesting. There was a guy who was, because I was going to write about how there's a veteran in every play, and then I saw this guy had done that, and I kind of lost my interest in it. But there is, but to your point, it's absolutely, there's some tremendous knowledge there. Yeah.
Well, Stefan, thank you. It's been an incredible conversation and so enlightening, and kudos to you, sir, for what you have done. Fellow Quillers, his name is Stefan Wolfert. It is decruit.org, Cruit.org. You can also find his one-man performance, Cry Havoc, on YouTube. And as I mentioned, I will put that on all of our social media feeds. He is far too humble because he is the 2022 APAP Fellow, the 2020 TCG Fox Foundation Fellow, recipient of the American Group Psychotherapy Association Aaron Stein Award, the 2019 National Alliance for Mental Illness, that's NAMI, most of you have heard of that, Max Gabriel Memorial Award, a member of the Therapeutic Alliance, and a member of the New York City Arts-Based Healing Coalition. He is Stefan Wolfort, and go seek out his stuff.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your work.
What a remarkable difference Stefan is making in the world through Shakespeare. You know, we like to think the Quiller Nation is also making a difference in the world, and we'd like you to join us in further making that difference by becoming a Patreon patron. You can find out the details by clicking the red button on the home page of our website, or by visiting patreon.com, Don't Quill the Messenger. That's patreon.com/Don't Quill the Messenger. You can join for free just to stay on top of what we post there, including things like the link we have already placed there to Stefan's YouTube performance of Cry Havoc. And believe me, you'll want to visit there, watch it. It is a compelling and dynamic performance. At the Patreon page, you can also review the library of bonus features that have collected there over the years. You may find some very interesting topics and recordings there that you obviously haven't listened to yet unless you've been a patron. So there's so much great bonus material there, and you can access it by joining at the Serial Quiller level or above. I'm super proud of the content there, including the latest 2 bonus episodes, one on the movie Hamnet, which is unfortunately making a giant splash around the world, which only goes to prove that historical fiction is the way into the door to people to get them to believe just about anything. And if you think about some examples of that, like, Oliver Stone's movie JFK, for instance, and how that made such a huge paradigm shift in the JFK assassination narrative. Anyway, there's my episode on Hamnet, and then there's also the most recent episode, bonus feature, is on the power of the theme of recognition that we find throughout the entire Shakespeare canon. And I think that you will find that very interesting. When you join at the Serial Quiller level, you not only gain access to the bonus library and receive an entry into our monthly Quiller of the Month drawing, but you also gain the knowledge that your small contribution is going toward covering the production expenses of us continuing to bring you the great content we work to create month after month in our effort to continue to make a difference when it comes to the world's understanding of the works of Shakespeare on every level. I'd like to take a moment to shout out to this month's Quiller of the Month, known to us all simply as Quizzi. And as you can see, you can be an anonymous Quiller at the Patreon page, or you can also create your own handle, such as what Quizzi has done. And thank you, Quizzi, for being a loyal Quiller, and congratulations on winning this month's drawing. We hope you will enjoy your free item from the Quiller Swag Shop. You know, I just received a package of swag I ordered to replace some of the aging items I've had for several years now. My T-shirts that I own, I've had for so many years, and I've worn and washed so many times. They have started to move into the segment of my T-shirt drawer that I wear for like banging around or working in the yard type of stuff. So I replaced those with some bright new ones that I can wear. I always like to wear them when I'm traveling because inevitably somebody will ask me about, what is that? What is Don't Quill the Messenger? And it just opens up the door, doesn't it? And hopefully that's helping me convert new Quillers. You can do that too. And the reason I'm telling you that is to let you know that we don't cash in on the swag items. The cost is merely the cost of getting them printed and distributed to you through the supplier. And even I have to order them through the shop to get the items that I want. It's not like we have a giant stock somewhere in a warehouse and we're marking them up and generating retail revenue off of that. That's not the point. The point is to get the logo out there, to give you an opportunity to wear them with pride, to show your Quiller support to the world. So I encourage you all, please take a look in the shop. And if there's something that you see that you think you could display that might spark a conversation, that's the whole point, then please consider doing so, because it's not about generating money for us, but it is a great way to support the show by representing the podcast and using the swag items as conversation starters. I'm also going to encourage producer Jake to create a commemorative shirt for this May's Shakespeare and the Law event at Gray's Inn. Hopefully we can get it made and available before the event so those who are attending can order one and wear it on the day of the event. That would be cool. And speaking of that monumental Shakespeare event, the registrations are rolling in. And remember, seating is limited, so don't miss out by waiting too long to decide to join us. I guarantee it is going to be the most entertaining and informative Shakespeare authorship event you have ever attended. I'm not trying to throw anyone else under the bus. I know I criticize the two main Deverian-based organizations for what I feel is a plateau they have reached and a lack of momentum, but I'm not trying to criticize their events. I'm just saying that this event will not include some of those droll and boring academic style types of presentations that you have witnessed in the past. Our event is going to be chock full of dynamic presenters and polished performances by professional Shakespearean actors. I'm not talking about readers' theater with people sitting in chairs and holding scripts in their hands. I'm talking about fully rehearsed and properly costumed, and I hope well directed, if I do say so myself, performances of some of the best Shakespeare actors I have ever worked with, all the way from LA to Southern Oregon and up and down the Pacific coast. And it is all included in the registration fee. No additional ticket to purchase to see the performances. They're all part of the symposium. So right there before you, with the actors almost close enough to touch, in the great hall of Gray's Inn, where we know for a fact at least one Shakespeare play was performed and probably many others, you will witness famous scenes from several plays brought to life right before you. That, my friends, is worth the ticket price alone. So as I say, it's going to be the most entertaining and educational event that you will have ever attended when it comes to the Shakespeare authorship mystery, and we want you to be there to witness it. It's the best authorship ticket ever, or should I say EVIR. I hope you'll join us, and if you were there the evening before the event, you can meet all of us face to face. Watch a little sample of the actor's quality, as it were. I'm sure I can urge them all to deliver a few little samples, some monologues perhaps, there in the gathering area of the tavern that we have booked for our cocktail social event the night before. Toss back a pint or two with us at the preview cocktail reception. There's no charge for that. It is a cash and carry situation. So show up, order what you want if you want, and enjoy a little taste of the actors and getting to meet some of them, and come up and say hi to me and the sponsors of the event, because we'll all be there the night before. All of these details are available at monumentalshakespeare.com. monumentalshakespeare.com. monumentalshakespeare.com for full details. And everything you need to know is right there. Click on the registration button. It takes you right to the ticketing site. It's a very simple process, private and secure. And as I said, registrations are rolling in, so you don't want to wait, because the Great Hall can only hold so many people. And we want sight lines to be insured so that everyone can see the actor's performance quite well, and you're not having to look through multiple heads. to see what the actors have prepared. And as I said, fully rehearsed, fully costumed, and what I believe to be exquisitely performed scenes from some of the best plays in the canon, and especially those that surround or have themes that surround the law. And you'll hear about why those scenes are so important and why they are so important to the law of the time, as well as how they helped shape the law of today. So monumentalshakespeare.com. Can't wait to see you at Gray's Inn, London in May. Thanks again, fellow Quillers, for your loyal support. And until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.